everyone, welcome to our high-level introduction to SuiteProjects Demo. We'll be talking about here the SuiteProjects module available in NetSuite to discuss requirements relating to your projects management and how it can be handled in NetSuite. So we're going to talk about the different data points, the process flows, and an actual demo of NetSuite system showing you the SuiteProjects module. So before we go into the actual demo in the system, where we're gonna run through all of these data points and records in an actual NetSuite environment, this is just a brief summary of what's to come in this discussion. So first one, we're gonna discuss about the process flow, high level, how SuiteProjects is expected to behave and expected to be set up. We have here master data and project data. We're gonna speak exhaustively of these two data points because they'll be necessary when setting up projects, and we'll be putting a differentiation between the two. Once we have a differentiation, I'm also going to run through the actual records in NetSuite, what kind of master data and project data are needed, and the different forms there available for you to create those records on. And we have project execution and management. So very high level here, we emphasized 5 major steps in the project's flow within NetSuite. One, as I mentioned, is the creation of the master and project data. So we're going to have a differentiation between the two later on, but essentially master data would be your core list data in NetSuite that are used by all process areas, while project data would be the data points specific to your projects. And once those master data are there, you have to make sure now that the project creation is done. So this project creation can be done in a multitude of ways. It could be through the UI directly, it could be through an import, it could be from a sales transaction, or it could be from templates. So those are all available for us, but during this demo, I'm just going to show you the project created in our demo environment. Resource assignment. So part of projects creation is also creating the financial data that you need to track with your projects and the tasks that you need to track in those project records. After you do all that, you have to assign the resources. Whether these resources are subcontractors or actual employees, they would need to be allocated to the projects for them to enter time into these projects or to do transactions with these projects. So resources can be assigned at the top level, just at the project record, or at the task level of these project records. And I'm gonna discuss the advantages of that as well, but that is necessary for these resources to actually do transactions in projects. Then we have project execution, where we're gonna run through the different transactions you can do in projects, invoicing, billing, assigning purchases to projects, and also time entries against projects. And then reporting and management, so the available Gantt charts, the different views you have, the different KPIs and reporting available for project records. Last slide here in this presentation before we go into our demo is a difference between the master and the project data. So essentially we just covered 5 major factors here. One, of course, is the nature of these data points. Master data are the foundational setup data required by NetSuite, while project data is specific to projects only. Then we have dependency. So master data is independent of project data, meaning it can stand alone, but project data usually are dependent on master data. So an example of this is a resource for project data, for example, is dependent on the master list data set up for employees or vendors. So without an employee or a vendor, you cannot create a resource in NetSuite. Okay. So master data, its necessity, it's of course required by standalone NetSuite, and it's also required by SuiteProjects. Project data is not required by standalone NetSuite. So doing P2P, O2C, R2R in NetSuite does not require to have project data, not necessarily, but projects require to have these project data, of course, as part of their transactions. And then master data, it's usually created and maintained by the administrators. So they're set up by admin and also maintained by the admin of the NetSuite environment, compared to a project data, which is usually done by project managers, but they can also be created by NetSuite administrator understanding that NetSuite administrators do have full access into all records in NetSuite, so they do have that capability to still do project data even without project managers. And then lastly, some examples of master and project data. So for master data, we have employees, items, customers, vendors, and chart of accounts. And as you notice, these are all records or data that can be used across different process areas within NetSuite, not just for projects. As compared to project data that we have here, which are project information, project tasks, resources, time tracking, and project financials, which are more likely and more tied to projects rather than the whole NetSuite system. Okay, so I think we're good there to give you a brief background of our demo, and we're gonna dive right in to an actual NetSuite demo environment here that we'll be using. So first up, as mentioned in the process, is to run through the different master data and project data setup. One of the master data that you have to set up initially is the employee record. And the purpose of this demo is not to show you how to create these employee records or to set up actual employees, but to how to actually relate these employee records to projects. So this is the master data for employee. And the form could look different based on the customizations and configurations you have. But essentially, to assign an employee or to mark an employee available for projects, you really have to make sure that this checkbox right here, which is the project resource, is checked. This setup is actually the main requirement for an employee or a vendor to be a resource for projects. So by checking this, you are making the employee or this record available for usage as a resource. But if this is not checked, these employee or any other record will not be available for assignment to projects later on. Okay. Apart from checking the project resource checkbox here, there's also other fields that you would want to consider, especially if you are doing more complex projects. So you have billing classes. This billing class is actually more for billing. So NetSuite does have this grouping together of resources that you can assign that will be billing the same rate or are using the same tier of rate when they're charging hours to projects. So an example here is a class of consultant, a class of project managers, and a class of executives. So NetSuite is not expecting you to, or it's not expecting these different tiers to be charging the same rate to clients. That's why it has that capability for you to create billing classes. So you can assign those billing classes to a specific group of people, and they'll be by default charging the same rate to the different customers or projects. You also have labor cost. If you need to track costing for the hourly charges for these employees, you can associate a labor cost to them. One more important part here is under human resources. There is a project manager role that you need to also check if this particular employee needs to be a project manager. If this is not checked, then the employee can only be a project resource but not a project manager. Okay. So once that is all set up and the project resources and the different project related fields are enabled, then you can go ahead and check out the other master data. One more important thing about employee records, especially if you need them to, of course, enter time against projects, is to make sure that they have access at least as an employee center. This one is required for them to access NetSuite, log in, and then enter the different transactions to projects that they're assigned to. If you have a full license role assigned to this employee, then they can also do all of those employee center things. But the minimum requirement for an employee or a resource to enter time or do transactions within NetSuite is an employee center role. Okay. Apart from employees, we're also going to talk about items. Specifically for projects, items that are needed for projects are those that are service items. Okay. The reason is because whenever you are doing transactions for projects, it's expected that you're going to charge hours to that project. And to assign or to be able to enter time against those projects would have to be assigned a service item. That's why you have to have at least a list of your available service items and use them and assign them to projects so that your employees or your resources can then enter time against them. So if you don't have any service item available, then you will not be able to enter time against projects. So just to give you an overview here of a service for sale, for example, I'm not going to go through again all of these things. I just wanted to highlight a few stuff here, especially for accounting, making sure that your income account is there as well. If you are doing a deferral of revenue, make sure that your revenue account here has a deferred account as well. That is why we also have this revenue recognition or amortization tab here for services. For usual projects where the services and sales are extended through long periods, it's not expected, accounting-wise at least, that the revenues are going to be directly posting. Meaning, when you're, let's say for an installation business, it's not expected that once you do an installation for a whole year, spread out maybe in 12 months, you're not expected to enter the whole income as revenue for the first month alone. So you would have to defer that, stretch it out to the period of the actual performance of the service, right? So that's why you have to make sure that the setup here is correct, especially for an example of that is more fixed fee, where the services are stretched, but you have a fixed amount of revenue or collections that you get from the client. Those usually would require deferred revenue accounting. But for the cases of more usual T&M projects where you only charge against time, you only charge against expenses, those usually are direct revenue posting items, meaning you don't have to defer the revenue. So as soon as you charge the hours, as soon as you charge the expenses, they're directly revenue in the books. So just make sure that you have those differentiation between the two, because these would of course affect your revenue recognition and how they're going to translate into your revenues relating to projects later on. Okay, I'm not gonna go through customer records anymore because they're not none of the setup for customer records would be necessarily required to be changed when you're going to assign them to projects. I'm gonna talk about vendors though. So depending on your business model, if you have subcontractors working on projects, you can also make vendors resources, just like what you did for your employees. Of course, you would need to give them access to the system just to enter time if they need to. But just make sure that for the vendor records, that project resource role, wherever that is specifically for your form, is checked as well. Okay, so that's the master data mostly that are going to be required for projects. Let's move into an actual project data. Okay, so let's go to lists, relationships, and jobs. So in this demo environment, it's called a job, though for other accounts it might be called a project, but there's no difference in it. It's just the nomenclature. Okay, so we have here an open project already. Let's view this one. Okay, so primary information here for the job would be the name, of course, the subsidiary it's related to, and the customer. A customer is not required for a job, not necessarily always. NetSuite does provide that flexibility for you to assign a job to a customer if it's going to be an external project that you have to bill later on, or if it's going to be an internal project where it's just a company job or a company activity that you just need to track. You can actually leave the customer record here blank if that's going to be the case for internal projects. Project type is really more of a categorization. If you're going to do some reporting later on, if you're going to group projects together, you can create multiple project types and then just assign them to different jobs. Project overview here at the bottom, mostly this is NetSuite computed in the back engine. So all of the planned work, those are the hours assigned to the project, the actual work, how many hours were actually already entered against the project, the completion, those are all computed by NetSuite engine. So none of it is going to be manually entered by you. Some of the custom fields here are risk levels and risk details. They're just added fields for this particular form. That also gives you an idea that the form in NetSuite, while it's already a bit rigid on its own, you can still add more details and add more fields to suit whatever are your requirements in tracking information against projects. That brings us to project dates, which are again computed by NetSuite engine based on your start date and the hours you've assigned. It calculates an end date. And if the project is already completed, there's an actual end date here as well. Then classification is more of how you tag the project to different segments. So if there's a classification for the project, if there's a location for it, a department, you have to assign them here. And then project manager, this is where that setup earlier on an employee as a project manager comes into play. So if a project manager has been assigned as an employee, or sorry, the employee has been assigned as a project manager, they'll be available to assign here. If not, then of course that employee will not be a project manager in this case. Okay, very straightforward approach here at the top of the project record. At the bottom you have multiple sub-tabs just to give you more overview of the data that's required, or maybe even additional information that you can just track with the project. I'm not going to go through all of these individually, but just focus on usually the main things that are set up for all kinds of projects regardless of the complexity. First one here is the project schedule, right? So the project schedule is really the list of tasks or activities that are going to be done for the project. And you have here different ways on how to view the schedule. So depending on your need, depending on how you want to view them, you have multiple ways on how to do that here. Of course, it already gives you an idea of the chronology of the transactions or the activity from start to finish. You can view a project task here individually, directly as well. So let me just bring this into view. Of course, there's more data in the actual core record of the project task than just what you see in the schedule view from the project record. So the project task here, you can put in a name and then assign it a project parent task if needed. So that gives you that hierarchy that you saw in the project schedule, where there's a parent task and a child task under it. So you can assign a parent task here. You can put in where you would want this project task to be seen. And then at the bottom, you can assign the project's task dates. Let me just put an edit here. And the planned work. So the planned work is the number of hours you're expected to do for this project. And that would be also the basis of NetSuite in computing the end date of this project based on the planned work you have here. You put in the constraint type as well. So depending on how you want to have this task be started, you can do that. You can assign the actual start date and of course the end date will be completed based on the planned work at the bottom. So more on this later on as I discuss the resources, but that's primarily the information you have there for project tasks. And just to compare it against milestones, because you do have that milestone option here to add. Project tasks are really the activities where your resources are assigned and they enter time against. Milestones, on the other hand, are usually done or used by companies to do a tracking of billing. So in contrast, milestones don't really have that capability to be assigned to or track hours against. They're really just there as placeholders that when you say it's completed, NetSuite will just gives you a heads up that, hey, there's a milestone that's been completed, we can now bill a particular client. And this is specific if you are doing a milestone billing approach where the completion of a milestone triggers an invoice creation. So that's primarily the difference between the two. Okay. You also have different views here that you can explore for the schedule. Okay, so one of the main ones is doing a Gantt chart view. This one, while very rigid, also gives you an idea of the different critical paths. So you have here filter and analysis options available, so you can highlight the critical path, what are the baselines of the different tasks. If you wanted to see specifically filters, you can do that here as well. And you can scale this further, whether it's going to be a 1-year scale, a 10-week scale, or 5-year scale. So the different tasks and projects that you have there assigned. Okay. So let's go back to the schedule. And as I mentioned in the presentation deck earlier, once the project record is created, plus the different project information is there, you have to, of course, assign the resources to this project. So assigning the resources here. You can create a resource directly in the project record. So just by creating the project allocation here, you can assign your different resources to the different tasks of the project and how many hours they're going to be allocated to. By doing this here at the project level, you're now assigning a task to a resource to the task, but you're still not assigning a resource to, you're assigning resources here to the project already, but not yet to the specific tasks. You can have multiple preferences here. Say you have 500 resources and you've assigned 10 resources to the project. There is a preference that you can turn on so that each of those resources can enter time against any of the tasks that you have here. So that's the convenience of it. However, of course, if you want a more rigid approach where specific people will only be able to enter time against specific tasks, then you need to make sure that at the project task level, like this one, just bring that into view. There is a resources section here. There's an assignees section here, where you would have to put in the actual resource for that particular activity. So of course, by doing that, you're limiting the time charges to that particular task to be only for those employees or resources assigned to that task. Okay. Under financial, as part of the creation of the project record, you're required to put in your billing type. So depending on what kind of policies and project agreements you have, the billing type could be one of many ways, like time and materials, fixed fees, or charge based. You can all create that, and this would of course dictate the behavior of the project when you bill it. Okay. Of course, I talked about preferences. So these are the behaviors that you can set up in the project, and understanding, of course, how they would affect your transactions later on is vital. So I advise you to probably just look at these different preferences and then tweak around what is specific or what is applicable to you guys. Right, so that's creating the project record and assigning the different resources to it. As I mentioned, you can add multiple custom fields here to suit your requirements if there are more fields that you need, especially, for example, if you are integrating an external platform into NetSuite and there's more data that you need to fetch from that external platform into NetSuite, you can create those custom fields here and then just match them to have that singular source of truth specifically in the system. Okay. One of the main transactions that are done against projects is actually doing the time entries. So as a full license user, or as an administrator in this case, I can actually enter time for other employees. So this is my user. I can actually do time entries for other employees here. And depending on their assignment, of course, the list here would be limited to what is assigned to them. But essentially, once you select the resource, that already limits the different customers' tasks and the different hours that are associated to them. You can have here an approval process Usually I see here an approval process where the project manager goes in and approve, and maybe for some entities, even the administrators or executives come in to approve for smaller ones for timesheets, because this one would dictate your let's go back here. This one would dictate your project completion. So this one, as I mentioned earlier, is a NetSuite computed ratio or percentage based on the completion of the hours that are assigned. At the bottom, though, if you're doing a revenue recognition based on percentage completion, this is very useful because NetSuite already computes this for you out of the box, so you don't have to do anything. But if you want to override that and say, for example, you want to use your own percentage completion, maybe the percentage completion for hours is not exactly 100% how you would say that a project is completed. Maybe there's other factors like costing, maybe there's other factors like overrun of hours that you want to adjust the percentage of completion. You can override the percentage complete here. Of course, you would need to have access to the project record to do the overriding action, but that would allow you to actually specify. Let me just edit this job record. To specify, say, for example, for our existing period, which is July, you can specify here that for July, maybe you'd want to be at 15%. Then maybe once you get into August, you want your whole cumulative percentage complete to just be 25. This could be of course, this could be equal to what you have here as computed by NetSuite as a percentage complete, but it could also be far different. So the main usage of this is if it's a vast difference between how you actually compute your percentage complete versus what NetSuite has. So whatever you put in here, it would be the basis of NetSuite for revenue recognition if you do have deferred revenue recognition set up for your projects. Okay, and of course, once all of these are done, you can assign these projects to different transactions as well. So if you're entering bills, let me just live here. And let's say you have purchases that you want to assign to the project. Maybe you'd want to have them as billable later on, or to just track the costs for the project more effectively. You can assign the project now as a line item. So for every purchase that you have, or for every expense there, you can assign the job or the project record as an associated record to it. So for example here, once you have a bill, just put in a random data just for the purpose of the walkthrough. Then at the bottom, if you are purchasing or you are doing an expense for office expense, notice here that there's a customer or project field that you can assign to this particular transaction already. Okay, so by doing that and assigning a project to it, that expense will be part of the reporting for costing. And of course, that would be available now to be, if you want it to be billable, you can also do that once you have a project related to it. So if you mark this as billable, then whenever you generate invoices that are billable to clients, whatever account or amount in here would be part of that billable expense to be charged to the client. And that brings us to creating the invoices for clients, right? So transactions, customers, and then invoicing the billable customers. This is, of course, solely for time and materials and the most straightforward approach. If there's any billable time, billable charges, and expenses to that, to different projects, they would be shown here. So this is the project that we had earlier. And you can review the invoice as with any NetSuite invoice to come up with the actual records if you have to add more line details for this particular invoice. But essentially, billing anything billable, so if there's billable time, if there's billable items, they'll all be part of the invoice to be generated here. Okay, so just to give you a rundown, invoice here, then clicking through the different sublists at the bottom, you have here billable time. This shows you the actual employee time entries that were created, and how many hours, what was the rate, and then the actual total amount. Of course, if you wanted to add more line items here, you can add more line items as needed. If there's billable expenses, they would also be shown here specifically, or just like what you had in the billable time section. Then lastly, for reporting, you have here projects. You have a project profitability report option, and there are also time and billables option. So usually this is the sought after report because it gives you an idea of the progress, the utilization, what is the project billing, and what are the times entered by the actual resources. So you can explore these different reports to give you an idea of what you need here when you're looking at data points coming into NetSuite. But all of these reports are standard right now. They come out of the box when you have your NetSuite suite projects. They're all out of the box. But if there's more reports or KPIs that you want to track, we can always create customizations to suit those needs and requirements. And going back to the actual project record as well. So let me open back the project record. There's also a built-in dashboard reporting system in the job record. If you need to see at a high level all the different records, reports, KPIs, or custom reports related to this job, there's a dashboard icon here that you can click. And at a glance, it gives you an overview of the whole project. So resource allocations, the Gantt chart. If you have custom reports or there's related transactions, they're all going to be here. And we can, of course, add more as needed. What kind of other reports and what kind of other financial data you'd want to see here, we can always add more to that as needed. Okay. So very high level, that's how the SuiteProjects module work in NetSuite. Gives you an idea of your resources, the different tasks, putting them all together in one project record, doing transactions with that record, usually time entries, billable expenses and billable time. Then of course creating the reports and the billing from that project. So hopefully this has been helpful for you, understanding of course a high level glance of the SuiteProjects module. For any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to us. Then we can schedule a call or a demo to further assist you in your needs.